Hi, I'm Yulia, and this is the News Brief special. Although, I guess at this point, it's just the News Brief because we always do a special one these days. Today, we're going to be talking about how in the past 2 weeks of the Trump administration, the world feels like it's been 2 years. And of course, we're going to be discussing it together in the comments, so I don't have to suffer through it alone, and you don't have to suffer through it alone. And as per usual, please leave your questions, suggestions, and constructive criticism down below in the comments because I read all of it, and I love hearing from you guys. Let's go. So as I've just said in the introduction, it's only been 2 weeks of Trump in office and Trump's administration, and so many things have already happened. So many controversies. I think the world is on its toes and quite literally tired of the amount of information that comes out, and there are already so many conspiracy theories, so many fears, and so many controversies. So we're going to be going over some of them today. One of them starts like this. After Trump won, he said that he's not going to run for the third term unless you guys, aka Congress, figure out how he can. And then this week, we had a GOP representative propose a bill that would allow Trump to serve a third term. And of course, half of the American people that voted for Trump and that are MAGA supporters are very happy about it and see no problem, and the rest of the world is comparing it to America slipping into a dictatorship. And then those that support Trump say, well, if this is a dictatorship, then what are you going to call the FDR four-term service? And then what's happening with Zelensky then? Well, let's start with the FDR. Yes, FDR is the only American president that has ever served 4 terms. And his third and fourth term were during the Great Depression and World War II. Now, the country was in crisis. There was a lot going on, which arguably Trump supporters can say that America is in crisis right now and Trump has a precedent to become president again. But term limits were imposed after FDR's presidency specifically so the country does not fall into a dictatorship, because no matter what justification, Great Depression, World War II, the necessity FDR had to run 4 times, it's not okay to not have term limits, especially because we've also seen this before. We've seen this with Putin, where Putin took off the 2-term limit and just made it 3. And then after he almost served the rest of his third term, he just decided to take off term limits at all. And he also increased the presidency term limit from 4 years to 6 years in Russia. So now the elections are every 6 years, and Putin can run as many times as he wants, and he can be president until he dies, because realistically, the elections don't mean anything, and he is just president forever. So I guess the FDR argument is not the best, because clearly this is a very different situation, and after he was president, the Second Amendment was added and term limits were imposed. Here is the justification that he used to run for presidency so many times. You have economic domestic issues and you have foreign policy with the outbreak of World War II in 1939, says Barbara Perry, professor and director of presidential studies at the University of Virginia's Miller Center. And then you have his own political viability. He had won the 1936 election with more than 2/3 of the popular vote. Eventually, U.S. lawmakers pushed back, arguing that term limits were necessary to keep abuse of power in check. Exactly. 2 years after FDR's death, Congress passed the 22nd Amendment, limiting presidents to 2 terms. Then the amendment was ratified in 1951. At the time of FDR's third presidential run, however, there was nothing but precedent standing in his way, says Perry. But still, precedent, especially as it relates to the presidency, can be pretty powerful. There are term limits for a reason, and here is where I expect a lot of Russian bots in the comments to go, well, what about Zelensky then? That's the real dictator, because Putin has elections, and Trump had elections, and the only person that doesn't is Zelensky. Well, Ukraine is under the martial law, and the majority of Ukrainian people don't want an election right now. There are so many people that can't vote. We actually have real reasons. Because again, I can see how the argument here would be, well, half of the Americans don't want an election and they just want Trump to be there forever or for the next term or whatever, right? But here, we're actually under a full-scale invasion. A lot of Ukrainian citizens are at the front line fighting, and they're not going to be able to vote. A lot of people have been killed. They're not going to be able to vote. A lot of people live in the occupied by Russia territories, and they're not going to be able to vote. An election in in Ukraine during martial law is unconstitutional. And when you hear Zelensky speak, he's not thrilled to be president for more than he signed up to be. But he understands that it's his duty because his country's existence is put into question. When you listen to his interview with David
До
Letterman,
нашої перемоги я точно буду президентом, а там навіть не думаю. Поки що не думаю. Не готовий. Дуже хочеться просто на море, хочеться. Скажу вам відверто, Девід, я дуже хочу на море. Просто на море, коли вже ми перемогли, і випити пива. Дуже хочу.
I'd like a cold glass of beer now.
I think that gives you a lot of answers as to why he does not seem like a dictator. When asked if he was going to run for another term when the war is over, the martial law is over, and there is an election, Zelensky said, I just want a beer on a beach and a vacation. It is unlikely that after all of this is said and done, that he would want to run again. And also at this point in this country, there is not really a feasible, viable opponent. Also, in order to create an election campaign, you need to spend so much money that our country doesn't have to spend on election campaigns. We should be spending that money on rebuilding. We should be spending that money on the military. We should be spending that money on everything else other than a presidential campaign. And of course, how are you going to run an election with a president that everyone already knows everything about and a person who just comes out of nowhere, out of the woodwork, and has no presidential running campaign? It makes no sense. Now, to this argument, many people say that Trump cannot become a dictator because, well, he is going to be 80 soon, he's 79, and that he's unlikely to survive until a third term. Or if he does, he's not going to live much longer just because of life expectancy, and reasonably, he is old. Well, that's not really a very good cause or a very good case because what Trump is doing today is dismantling absolutely all of America's institutions, and they're falling for it and showing no resistance. So yes, sure, he might not be able to take power in a third term, but the precedent would be there if, term limits were taken off, and he's setting up all the infrastructure for his party to have unhinged, unchecked power. And for you guys to not be able to get rid of this party or change it once he's gone or when the next in line, in his protégés, comes to power. And we have a precedent like that from Venezuela. Do you know who Chavez is? Chavez was the president of Venezuela from 1999 to 2013. And he was holding unhinged power. He was a dictator. And today, everybody has heard, I believe, about Maduro. But you don't know how Maduro came to power. He's Chavez's protege, and the road was set up for him to take power, and he practices Chavism, or Chavism, which is exactly the same rule of the land as Chavez did.
In 1992, a run-of-the-mill unknown soldier called Hugo Chavez, a nobody, tried to overthrow the government. He failed, but he was still allowed to address the nation. And that was a fatal error for those in power. Chavismo was born. This is your background check on Hugo Chavez and his ideology, Chavismo. By the time Chavez was pardoned, he'd already created a grassroots bulldozer aimed at smashing a two-party system and returning the people to power. His left-wing ideology upended polls. He won the presidency. He rewrote the Constitution. He was a natural-born winner. After a failed coup in 2002, this time against him, Chavez pushed hard. He consolidated his grip, placing those loyal to him in power. He rewarded his friends. The following years were a gravy train. Chavez spent freely on social programs and showered wealth on regional allies. He tilted the entire region left. Poverty fell. Chavez built his own multipolar world to stand up to the U.S. He befriended China, Cuba, Russia, and Iran. He was his own brand. Red t-shirts, red hats. The oil company chief declared his company was red. Very red. Chavismo was Chavez, and Chavez was Chavismo. And he was invincible until cancer struck. Chavez lost his hair. His health collapsed. Chavez, the winner, finally lost. And he died shortly after his last electoral win. Fast forward today, and his dream is coming apart. People are starving. There's no medicine. Misery is rampant. Venezuelans are fleeing by the thousands. Nicolás Maduro, his successor, has tried to keep Chavismo alive. It's not working. A large deficit, a currency crisis, falling oil, they've plunged Venezuela into its deepest ever depression. But Chavez lives on for now. His image is everywhere. Paintings, murals, photos. His trademark eyes are all over the country. His quotes, propaganda. History will tell whether Chavismo outlasts the current caste. Will it become something long-standing like Peronismo in Argentina? Or will Chavismo fade into obscurity as a failed socialist experiment in the tropics?
It's difficult to overstate how dire Venezuela's economic plight is. The country entered a deep recession in 2014 when Maduro became president, spurred by the drop in global oil prices, and cumbersome regulations on its currency are helping produce record-breaking inflation. The International Monetary Fund estimates that prices in Venezuela are set to increase more than 700% this year. 75% of the country's population has lost an average of 19 pounds of body weight between 2015 and 2016 due to food shortages throughout the country. But Maduro has done everything he can to prevent swelling popular discontent from limiting his power. His tactics place him among a special league of democratic authoritarians like Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who has used a referendum to expand the powers of his presidency, imprisoned political prisoners, attacked the judiciary branch of his government, and restricted free press in the wake of an attempted coup against him last year. Both leaders use crisis as a pretext for strengthening executive power while leaving the pillars of their country's democratic institutions intact. And you might say, Yulia, why are you saying this? This has nothing to do with Trump. He's not doing any of it. Well, I mean, he is. There is a bill that was introduced in Tennessee that is going to be voted on this week, I believe, that basically punishes representatives of the House for voting against policies that Trump wants to implement. So, if they happen to vote against things that Trump wants for this country, they're going to be punished by immediately having to resign from office. That, in fact, is expending presidential authority. That is blackmail, and that is not okay. And and that law is, I believe, Tennessee 6001. I think it's HB 6001 or BC 6001. I don't want to lie, but you can look it up yourself. It's not okay. There are many things like that happening in the country. And trust me, as someone who's seen this in many countries before and lives in a country that suffered from a dictatorship living right next to us, I'm going to tell you, whatever side you're on, make sure that you keep your rights, because today you might agree with what they're doing, but tomorrow they might target you, and you have no power to stop them. One of the other major concerns of the United States of today is comparing the strongman rhetoric of Trump and his cabinet against immigrants to Hitler's Germany, in a sense of singling out minorities. Trump is singling out illegal immigrants as the problem, right? However, he's not just targeting illegal immigrants. He's targeting all immigrants. He was saying he was going to deport the, rapists and murderers and killers, and the rhetoric has become that immigrants, bad, immigrants, rapists, immigrants are pillaging over the country and destroying people's lives. However, when you look up the face of rape in America, it's actually a white guy named Brock Turner, who had committed a heinous act in Stanford University. And if you know anything about the statistic of sexual assault against women or anyone really in America or anywhere in the world, it's normally not the people that you don't know, it's the people that you do know that commit these crimes. So, provided that Hispanic and Latino is a minority in America and white people are a majority, then you would think that the majority of these crimes are committed by the people Trump is not talking about, and they're committed in your close circle. So if illegal immigrants are not in your close circle or in your circle at all, then likely these crimes are committed by someone you know. And it's a very difficult subject to talk about, but I hope you understand what I'm trying to say, is that illegal immigrants are not the problem. The problem is how we raise men for the most part and what we allow them to do. And crime happens everywhere, whether you're legal or illegal or not an immigrant at all and you have birthright citizenship. Trump's press secretary yesterday called illegal immigrants criminals, and she said that this administration sees illegally crossing the border as criminal. Okay, I mean, up for interpretation, understandable, but still. Her next point was that birthright citizenship is not a right, and she called it unconstitutional. Birthright citizenship is enshrined in the American Constitution. How are you calling the Constitution unconstitutional? But here is where the catch comes in, right? Donald Trump's grandparents were German and they came here, and his parents, his dad, was born in America. And he's an American citizen, but he was born to people that did not have an American citizenship at the time. Then while his dad was a citizen, Trump's mom is a Scottish immigrant. And when Donald Trump was born, she was not a citizen. Gets better from here. All of Donald Trump's children, except for Tiffany, were born to mothers that were not American citizens at the time of their birth. Ivana Trump was not a citizen when Donald Trump Jr. and Ivanka were born. Same goes for Melania. She was not a citizen when Barron was born. So under Trump's own rules and regulations, that birthright isn't guaranteed just because you were born in the United States, and if your parent or parents are not American, then you're not supposed to have that right by default. In that case, none of his children have that right. Trump also says that if you were illegal in the country and you ended up getting a green card or a citizenship, that could be taken away from you because you committed a crime and he wants to deport criminals. Well, his wife was illegal. Both of his wives at some point were illegal in the United States. Melania got her citizenship through marriage, and at that point, she's overstayed her visa. Maybe it's time to look in your own backyard, and then everyone's favorite illegal man is Elon Musk. He actually immigrated from South Africa to Canada and then from Canada to the US, and he overstayed his visa. Now, while now he's an American citizen, I believe, he actually was illegal for quite a long time. So under Trump's administration and their new rules and regulations, Elon Musk needs to be deported as well. But of course, we're not going to be doing that to our allies, right? Another funny thing is that, America opened a hotline for ICE where you can call and report illegal immigrants for ICE to come and deal with. Actually, it suspended its operations yesterday because of how many people were calling and reporting Elon Musk. That one, cherry on top of the cake. Another parallel to Hitler's Germany is purging of the government agencies. And you might say, Yulia, that's not true. He's not purging the government agencies. Well, he is. A lot of government workers basically received a notification that they can either decide to forfeit their job or they can move to an unknown location in an unknown office, literally no one knows where, doing no one knows what, and keep their job. A lot of the government agencies were let go. A lot of government jobs were let go. The Department of Education is about to be no more. The National Guard was purged about 9 days ago, and so was the aviation safety 9 days ago as well. I mean, most of the government agencies don't know what's happening. A lot of their employees are being let go. It's hundreds of thousands. Genuinely. And they're being let go without notice or without anything. I mean, they are offered benefits and they are offered a generous severance package where they're being paid until September. But then, according to quite a few congressmen, there is actually no budget for those severance packages. But that's a conversation for a different day. There is a government purge. That usually is a sign of a dictatorship, and it's very, very unfortunate. That's a parallel. However, what makes it an even more eerie of a parallel to Hitler's Germany is that during the time that Hitler took power and was purging all of these agencies and creating concentration camps, no one really knew what was happening because it was happening so fast. When the first concentration camp opened in Germany, Hitler was in power for 50 days. And while we look back on history and we think that everyone knew what was happening and they were supporting it, that's actually not true. Most of the German people who were paying attention, of course, had their guesses. But those that weren't paying attention did not know that there were concentration camps. They were rumors and it was kept under the wraps. So places like Auschwitz-Birkenau were actually portrayed in the news as labor camps, where Jews were performing labor. And guess what happened in the United States yesterday? It took Trump 2 weeks to sign an executive order to renew Guantanamo Bay Prison. Guantanamo Bay Prison is a horrendous place. Here is a little bit of information about it in a video. It was closed by Barack Obama because, of course, this place should have no place to exist. And Trump had just signed an executive order to deport illegal immigrants into Guantanamo Bay. One of the places where they could be held while, their cases are being decided on or the government is deciding what to do with them. Just a camp outside of the United States. That is quite literally the definition of a concentration camp. It took Trump 2 weeks in office to create a concentration camp, and it took Hitler 50 days. Fun, isn't it? And when we go back to Trump purging the National Guard and purging the aviation safety that already resulted in a catastrophe, we just learned that a civilian aircraft had collided with a military Black Hawk helicopter, and that resulted in a crash into the Potomac River, where apparently 60 people were on board, and now all of the search and rescue services in America are involved.
It's dash cam footage, and it shows the moment the helicopter and plane collide as the jet comes into land. It was recorded from Joint Base Anacostia Boiling. As you can see there, the moment of impact, the debris then falling into the Potomac River just behind me. Well, the process, of course, to identify the victims has begun in earnest. As we've heard, 34-year-old Jonathan Campos was one of the American Airlines pilots who died during the incident. Professor Keir Duggins was a passenger on the flight from Kansas. She worked at Howard Law School here in Washington, D.C. Several ice skaters were travelling back from the US Skating Championships in Wichita. They included Evgenia Shishkova and Vadim Naumov, a married Russian couple. They'd been world champions back in the 1990s. Gina Han was among members of the Boston Skating Club. She died alongside her mother, Jin. And skater Spencer Lane also perished alongside his mother, Christine. Well, former Olympian Nancy Kerrigan said that the ice skating community would recover from this tragedy.
The main lesson, I think, learned in skating is you get back up. Keep on trying, and even when it's hard, you get back up. Even when you're crying, hurt, pain, you get back up.
Now, if this were to happen under President Biden, every one of Trump's supporters in America would be screaming at how horrendous his actions are. Well, here we have a direct result of the chaos that America has been plunged into in the past 2 weeks, manifesting themselves. Another big comparison that people are drawing, and mind you, I have my own political views, obviously, but these are objective facts that I'm trying to give you and help, and I'm not going to tell you to form a particular opinion. I want you to listen to all of these things, and I want you to form your own opinion. Because what I've noticed a lot with people who voted for Trump is when I tell them, well, here are these objective things that are very terrifying, they find any reason to find any excuse for him because they like him. And before I tell you this next point, I want to tell you that there used to be this riddle online. And the riddle went something like this. Who would you want to be your president? There are 3 choices. One of them is an alcoholic who drinks way too much whiskey every single day and, is quite a drunk. Another one is a person who has had a lot of infidelities and who, took power for longer than he should have. And then another one of them is inclined to art, doesn't drink, has never cheated on his spouse, and is a great family man with a lot of conservative values. And a lot of people chose the third one because, he doesn't drink, he has never cheated, he has all of these values, right? The third one was Hitler. The first one, the alcoholic, was Churchill, and the second one was FDR. When you don't know these things, you tend to place ideas on people. You tend to just look at these minor details, but you need the whole picture because between Churchill and Hitler, most of us would choose Churchill, I hope. So when you hear these things about Trump, try to separate this rhetoric from Trump and just look at it as if it was someone else and see if you're still okay with it. Because sometimes we tend to have bias based on, things based on facts being attached to someone that we feel for. And it's understandable. But in reality, listen to this. Another comparison that people are drawing attention to is similarities between the US today and Russia in the early 2000s. Elon Musk is being a billionaire who sponsored Trump's campaign and quite literally paid people $1,000 to vote for Trump, and that has been publicized. He's also said himself that he's the reason why Trump won the campaign because he's invested so much money into him winning the campaign. He also, spread all of the Trump favoring rhetoric on X. And I'm just saying that that's not okay, because that's a large amount of money to invest into algorithms to trick them and to tweak them so that you would only see things about Trump. So that means that the other candidates weren't nearly as highlighted. And that means that people were more likely to vote for Trump simply based on how much information there was about him out there. He was appointed to oversee the government that used to oversee him, because he's the richest person on the planet and he needs limitations, because when he doesn't get them, at this point, he's trying, and he admits to it, to meddle in world politics. He wants to have AfD elected in Germany. He has a candidate he likes in the UK, and he wants to put them in power. That simple sentence should be enough for you to be terrified, because a billionaire, the richest person on earth, is telling you, I want to put this, and that person in power. Want to put them in power. Terrifying. But the point is that Trump gave him power, and he gave him power over the government that's supposed to regulate him. And now he's in charge of the Government Efficiency Agency, and he has already purged so much in the government. He's not an elected official. He's an appointed official. But that brings me to the point that everyone around Trump is rich, and everyone around Trump is billionaires and millionaires, and that is also known as oligarchs. Russia is an oligarchy and a kleptocracy, which means that the oligarchs run the country. And this is now happening in the United States. If you look up how Putin came to power in Russia and how he held power in the 2000s, you will see quite a few parallels here. Now, for the people that voted for Trump, because Trump is the man of the people and he supports the people, right? Prices are rising, salaries are stagnating, and Trump's tax plan includes taxing everyone who makes under $300,000 more, which means that 99% of Americans are going to have their taxes go up. And then people who make over $300,000 a year, which is the 1% of Americans, 5% of Americans, those people are going to get less taxes. They're going to get tax cuts. So that is keeping the poor poorer and keeping the rich and making the rich richer. Because how in the economy where gas prices are going up, grocery prices are going up, jobs are being, people are being let go of, so there is a lot of unemployment, how are we taxing millionaires and billionaires less than we are taxing regular people? And then there is another trait of a dictator regime that I guess we're not paying that much attention to. J.D. Vance, Trump's vice president, has attacked education. We have seen numerous videos of universities throwing out books because there are books that the Trump administration is banning. They include things like The Handmaid's Tale and really any utopia, dystopia type of standing up for the government literature, history literature, history of American history, the unpleasant parts of the American history. But the worst of it all is J.D. Vance on air the other day said that professors and teachers are the enemy of America. An attack on education and purposeful misleading of people to think that education is not important to keep the country limited is a sign of a dictatorship. And with that, there is also another very big thing that everyone in the world is kind of watching and is not horrified, but terrified of. And I'm not saying any of this to change your mind about your situation or what you voted for or anything like that, but I just do want to say that a lot of these things are very concerning and a lot of these dynamics are repeating themselves. And a lot of these things, they're so evidently concerning and should ring alarm bells, but for some reason they're not. I think that a lot of people who voted for Trump think that when you tell them that there are things he does that should ring alarm bells, they think you're attacking them and they think you just hate the guy, so that's why you're doing that. That's not true at all. It's just that, when you are a student of history and you really love history, when you see it repeating itself so fast, it brings you some discontent, you get scared. So we have another concerning shift in the world dynamics where we have three strong men with fascist tendencies in charge of three of the world's most influential countries. We have Putin in Russia, we have Xi Jinping in China, and we have Donald Trump in America. The concern here is that all of these guys want domination, and they don't only want domination in their own country, is that they realize that their countries influence the rest of the dynamics in the world, and, well, all of them have different goals. So, this reminds me of the conference in Yalta 80 years ago where Churchill, FDR, and Stalin met and decided on the new post-World War II order, where it was supposed to be, peaceful existence, but it really only left Stalin with being able to conquer and purge the Eastern European continent with absolutely no checks or balances and to enslave countries. But it was supposed to give the world peace. The United Nations was actually created during that time. But during this time, I don't think that these three leaders are going to meet and are going to decide on a peaceful resolution for the new world order, because in reality, all of them have imperial ambitions and want to conquer. Putin wants to conquer the rest of Europe. We know his ambitions with Taiwan and other Asian countries. And with Trump, he just said he wants Greenland. He's also said some strange things about Canada. We're seeing him looking at the Panama Canal. He's renaming the Gulf of Mexico into the Gulf of America. And people are making a meme out of it. To me, it's not funny. All of these things, no matter what side you're on, there is a lot happening, and they're concerning, and they should be paid attention to. They should not be dismissed and memified like, Elon Musk zigging shouldn't be a meme. It should be of concern that so many people are defending it. What I want to say is that obviously you can have any opinion that you want to have, and you can look at all of these things from any different angle. But one thing is for certain, that with this presidency, the world is never going to be the same, and the world order is never going to be the same, because the U.S. is rapidly shifting from what it was to what it's becoming. And you can admit to that, being, a Trump supporter or not. Things are changing, and they're changing rapidly, and they're changing in a lot of ways. So the U.S. is really changing what it is at its core. And the rest of the world does depend on the US a lot. And what happens in the rest of the world depends a lot on what happens in the US. So one thing we know for certain, that after this presidency, whether, it turns into a dictatorship and Trump gets term number 3 or 4 or whatever, or whether he just peacefully transitions the power, which I don't really see happening, the world is never going to be the same, because the US is not going to be the same. It's going to be a totally different, totally transformed country, and that is going to influence the rest of the world. And that's all food for thought that I have for you for today. The goal of this episode is to present this information to you and compare, different scenarios that could happen based on history, and to have you make your own conclusions. So if you enjoyed this episode and you have thoughts that maybe you didn't have previously, or you have thoughts on this episode in general, please don't forget to comment them, because I really do want to hear from you. And of course, subscribe to this channel and turn on all of your notifications so you don't miss when the next episode comes out. Like this video and send it to a friend, because the more gears turn on this subject, the easier it's going to be to process. And I genuinely really want to know what you think when it comes to all of these facts that were presented to you. And maybe our opinions are completely different, but I do want to read them and I really want to hear from you. That's all, and I'll see you next time.